United States President Donald Trump has taken some interesting steps since taking office. Donald Trump first made thousands of domestic regulations and then turned to the international agenda. As Trump turned to the global arena, Canada, Mexico, and China faced unexpected tariffs. The US leader mentioned tariffs of 25% on Canada and Mexico and 10 to 60% on China. The tariffs on Canada and Mexico were then suspended for a month, but Trump's tariffs on China remained in place. In addition to these countries, the US leader also had the EU in his sights. Trump argued that the US has only suffered from its relations with the EU.
The EU treats us very, very unfairly, very badly.
The European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done.
Am I going to impose tariffs on the European Union? Absolutely. Absolutely. The European Union has treated us so terribly.
For this reason, Donald Trump stated that work on imposing tariffs on the EU has become urgent. In other words, the world political and economic agenda had entered a turbulent period. Most of the world's countries were wary of Trump's unexpected tariff moves. Even the Pacific countries were skeptical of these tax decisions, despite being considered allies of the United States. One of these countries was Japan. The Tokyo government has entered a critical period to avoid its name appearing on the pages of Donald Trump's tax decrees. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and US President Donald Trump had a very important meeting the other day. But was the Japanese Prime Minister able to steer the US leader away from the tariffs during their meeting? What important decisions in terms of international economic and political dynamics came out of this meeting between the US and Japanese leaders? Now, we will discover the answers to all these unknown questions together. But before that, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like to stay informed about our content. Let's get started. In fact, the answers to all these questions were hidden in the meeting between Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and US President Donald Trump, and what happened afterwards. The two leaders struck a warm tone and agreed that Tokyo would refrain for the time being from imposing tariffs on Trump's other allies. The two leaders praised each other at the White House, pledged to stand together against Chinese aggression, and claimed to have found a solution to the stalemate over the troubled US steel deal. The common rival was bringing the US and Japan significantly closer together. But despite the Chinese threat, the US leader did not change his position in any way, re-adopting the taxman role model. Trump pressed Ishiba to reduce the US trade deficit with Japan to zero, and warned that Tokyo could face tariffs on its exports if it failed to do so. This was one of Trump's clearest threats to Japan on record. After Canada, Mexico, and China, Trump now had Japan in his crosshairs. So how did Japan respond to Donald Trump's tax threat? Japan's approach was to praise Trump to the skies. Ishiba said at the joint press conference that he was very excited to see such a famous person. Both leaders said it was an opportunity for a rapprochement, the second visit by a foreign head of state in Trump's new term. The two leaders also further strengthened decades-old security and trade ties with the United States, despite concerns that Trump could be as tough on Tokyo as he has been on other US allies. In a photo exchange, Trump praised the 68-year-old Japanese Prime Minister as handsome. Donald Trump also laughed when Ishiba said he could not answer a theoretical question about whether he would retaliate against any US tariffs, saying that was actually a very good answer. Trump then said that Japan's Nippon Steel would make a major investment in US steel, but would not take over the troubled company as previously negotiated. The US leader stated that they would look at investing rather than buying the company. After these statements, it was finally time to return to the risks posed by China. Trump stated that he and Japan had agreed to fight China's economic aggression and issued a joint statement condemning Beijing for its provocative activities in the disputed South China Sea. After China, Donald Trump's arrows were aimed at North Korea. Despite having met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during his first term, Trump has said he wants to build relations with Pyongyang, but has also called for a denuclearized North Korea. In the wake of Trump's statements of support, Japan's pledge to invest $1 trillion in the US and increase its purchases of defense equipment from the US has been reported in the press. Ishiba stated that his country is the largest investor in the US and will increase its spending. By adopting this stance, Japan has protected itself from Trump's more punitive tendencies, such as sudden trade wars and pressure to increase financial contributions to host US troops. Of course, this historical process is one of the reasons why Japan and the US are on good terms, and why Trump is not targeting the Tokyo government with tariffs for the time being. A few days after Trump's first election victory, Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe rushed to bring him a gold-plated golf club. Trump also invited Abe's wife, Akie, to dinner at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida last December. Now Japan seems to be off US President Donald Trump's tax radar. Experts had already predicted problems between the two countries at the time of the election. Coincidentally, national elections in Japan and the United States were held at almost the same time in late 2024. In the US, the election date was fixed. In Japan, the general election to the lower house of parliament took place a year ahead of schedule due to the early dissolution of the second chamber. A coalition government in crisis, led by both the Liberal Democratic Party, Japan's largest political party with a conservative outlook, and Komeito, a centrist party, had lost popular support. And it had no alternative but to dissolve the lower house early and call early elections, which it lost by a decisive margin. The votes in both countries produced extremely important results. In the case of President-elect Donald Trump, a popular majority and a clear victory, with the support of the Republican Party, gave him control of both houses of Congress. In the case of Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, it was a hung parliament, with no party winning a majority in the country's 465-seat lower house. Mr. Trump could rule with tight control over all three branches of government for the next 4 years, while Mr. Ishiba planned to lead a minority coalition vulnerable to ouster. In comparison, with US citizens clearly voting for change against conservative rule, Japan faced instability and seemed on the verge of returning to revolving door governments where prime ministers could not serve for almost a full term. Today's political climate is very different from that of 8 years ago, when President Trump began his first term in the White House. In November 2016, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who tragically died on July 8, 2022, had the honor of becoming the first foreign leader to meet the president-elect at Trump Tower in New York City. Mr. Abe was in the midst of a record-breaking 8 years of uninterrupted leadership, during which time he radically changed Japan's image in the world and, most importantly, among conservative Americans. Mr. Trump's relationship with Abe during his first term was stable and close, marking a recent high point in US-Japan relations. Although Mr. Abe failed in his attempt to abolish Article 9 of Japan's constitution, President Trump saw him as a strong and successful leader. The American president counted the Japanese prime minister among an elite group of international politicians he respected and trusted. Abe has gained unusual personal access when dealing with foreign leaders that most Japanese politicians usually do not get. Contrast this with the current situation, where President-elect Trump is preparing for his second presidency and Prime Minister Ishiba is a newcomer with only a few months at the head of government. In November 2024, Tokyo requested a bilateral meeting with Mr. Trump for Mr. Ishiba after the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Leadership meeting in Lima. But the President-elect's office rejected this request, saying he was too busy and did not have time to meet with Mr. Ishiba. This could have been considered a diplomatic humiliation, leaving a bad taste and fueling speculation about a potential downgrade of US-Japan relations. In contrast, China and Japan seemed increasingly open to improving their relations with each other. At the Lima event on November 15, when Mr. Trump declined the Japanese leader's offer to meet, Chinese President Xi Jinping found time to hold a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Ishiba. This meeting raised the possibility that the relationship between Japan and China could become clearer over time. This is actually very risky. We are talking about China's efforts to bring Japan to its side. To understand this danger more clearly, we can take a deeper look at what China is aiming for now. The Beijing regime is currently resentful towards Moscow and Pyongyang. Beijing is therefore trying to steal US partners in the Pacific. All countries, except Taiwan, are seen by the Beijing regime as launching pads. If Tokyo gives Beijing the green light, it is generally believed that Japan could be included in these countries. In fact, Beijing's goal is clear: to fight and turn its rivals into a country in economic crisis and lacking military power. In line with all these stated goals, China has taken control and started ringing the war bells to intimidate Taiwan Island and the West. As you may recall, Chinese President Xi Jinping recently ordered his military to be ready for war. In his speech at the inspection of the Chinese People's Liberation Army Rocket Force Brigade, Mr. Xi stressed the importance of comprehensively strengthening training and combat readiness to ensure the military's combat readiness. Following Xi Jinping's decision to go to war, everyone focused on the island of Taiwan. But Beijing's focus was on more than just this country. Japan and the Philippines are also feeling the effects of China's tough military policies. China is using Russia in particular to put Japan under pressure to neutralize it. You know that there is a big problem between Japan and Russia over the Kuril Islands. It is in China's interest for this problem to grow and for Russia to create a high-tension line with Japan in the Kuril Islands. The Philippines is another country that feels China's pressure most clearly due to its proximity to Taiwan. The exercise areas and the deployment of weapons further emphasize the connection between the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait hotspots. An increase in the presence of Chinese vessels in Manila's Western Exclusive Economic Zone and another violent maritime incident over a disputed reef are adding to Beijing's defiance amid the alliance's show of force. Recently, China has deliberately stepped up its policy of military intimidation against Taiwan and sought to unilaterally change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. This violated the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force and the principle of peaceful settlement of disputes. Xi Jinping has stated that the PLA will be ready by 2027 and, with the aging of China's population, will probably take steps to realize these goals by 2030, while at the same time seeking annexation in his lifetime to consolidate its historical legacy. These statements actually deciphered China's plans for other countries in the region while putting Taiwan under siege. In other words, China wanted both Taiwan and the entire Pacific. As the Philippines and China continue their competing claims over specific islands, rocks, and other generally insignificant features in the South China Sea, a war between them seems highly likely. The problem is that ownership of even fairly small islands can provide land for military bases, while at the same time giving the country that can establish ownership extensive territorial waters and exclusive economic zones. On top of that, the Beijing regime seems to want to control ship movements throughout the entire South China Sea, or at least retain the right to veto ships it does not like, such as those involving American aircraft carriers. The Manila government is taking a contradictory position to Beijing's strategy. A land formation called the Second Thomas Shoal is currently seen as the most acute problem, as the Philippines deliberately left an old ship stranded in the shoal 25 years ago to assert its claim, and keeps military personnel there at all times. In 2016, a court of arbitration established under the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea ruled in favor of the Manila government, given the proximity of Philippine Islands to the shoal, meaning that the shoal is technically within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. But Beijing rejects this argument. The United States has not ratified the convention on which the court based its decision, but tends to accept its logic. China has sometimes tried to prevent the Philippines from resupplying its position. If the problem involved only China and another regional country, it would be preventable enough. But there are other countries in the region besides the Philippines that have disputes with China over the ownership of various islands. The United States, for its part, has a security treaty with the Philippines and may have to intervene to defend its ally in the event of an escalating crisis in the future. On the other hand, Japan is another place that China wants to control by playing the Russian trump card. This desire for control has brought China and Russia closer together. In 2024, the Chinese and Russian militaries conducted joint maneuvers ranging from live-fire naval exercises in the South China Sea to air patrols circling Japan and even entering American airspace in Alaska. In Moscow's response to rising geopolitical tensions around the world, such actions culminated in a joint Sino-Russian Ocean 24 exercise in which 400 ships, 120 aircraft, and 90,000 troops were mobilized in a wide arc stretching from the Baltic Sea through the Arctic to the North Pacific Ocean. In launching such monumental maneuvers with China, Russian President Vladimir Putin accused the United States of seeking to maintain its global military and political dominance at all costs by increasing its military presence in the Asia-Pacific region. In other words, the scenario China wanted was working. China had pitted Russia against the United States on the Japanese side. Japan reacted by trying to show that it was one of the most important military powers in the region. By 2025, Japan has a total of 155 naval assets, including 4 helicopter destroyers, 36 destroyers, 5 frigates, 6 destroyer escorts, 24 attack submarines, 30 mine countermeasures ships, 6 patrol ships, 3 landing craft tanks, and small auxiliary ships. This makes it difficult for China and Russia. The US is also aware that Japan is in danger. The US, which has nearly 54,000 troops in Japan, will probably not hesitate to step in to take control of the situation in the region, aware that the arrival of long-range bombers and the future prospect of atomic warfare have rendered the historical concept of coastal defense remarkably irrelevant. Washington has in the post-war years extended North American defenses deeper into the Western Pacific. Starting with the nationalization of 100 Japanese military bases, the US built the first post-war Pacific naval bases in Okinawa and, thanks to a 1947 agreement, in Subic Bay in the Philippines. When the Cold War engulfed Asia with the outbreak of the Korean conflict in 1950, the US extended these bases for 5,000 miles along the entire Pacific coast through mutual defense treaties with its 5 Asia-Pacific allies: Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Australia. Thus, for 40 years until the end of the Cold War, the Pacific Rim remained the geopolitical fulcrum of American global power. Now, US leader Donald Trump is expected to realize the real threats and understand the importance of Japan in the time to come. At the same time, Trump is urged not to crush Tokyo with heavy data rates. According to experts, only a harmonious relationship between the US and its Pacific partners can erase China's and Russia's footprint in the Pacific. Thank you for watching.